If you are just discovering this channel, welcome. Here at God's Verdict, we go deep into the moments where heaven responded. The moments that most people skip over. The moments that change everything once you understand them. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because this story is one of the most sobering accounts in the entire Bible. And it begins now. There is a passage in the book of Numbers that most people have never truly read. Not skimmed, not heard in passing, not summarized in a sermon, actually read slowly, carefully, line by line, until the full weight of what happened becomes real. Most people know the basic outline. Korah rebelled, the ground opened, people died. But that summary misses almost everything. It misses the complexity of the men involved. It misses the precise nature of what was challenged. It misses the intercession that happened in the middle of the judgment. It misses the plague that came the following morning. It misses the 14,700 who died, not because of Korah, but because of what the people said after watching the earth swallow him alive. It misses the full picture, and the full picture is the only one that matters. Because this account, written more than 3,000 years ago, carries a weight that does not diminish with time. It reveals something about the nature of God that makes everything else in Scripture sharper and clearer. It reveals something about the human heart that is just as true today as it was in the wilderness of Sinai. So we are going to read it together, slowly, with attention, because every detail in this story was preserved for a reason. The year is somewhere in the second half of the 15th century before Christ. The precise dating remains a subject of scholarly discussion, but most conservative biblical historians place the Exodus from Egypt around 1446 B.C., following the chronology established in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, which states that Solomon began building the temple 480 years after the Israelites came out of Egypt. If that dating is accepted, the events of number 16 would have occurred somewhere in the years following, during the 40-year period of wilderness wandering that followed the departure from Sinai. The Israelites had left Egypt. They had crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. They had camped at the base of Sinai and heard the voice of God speak the commandments. They had received the law. They had built the tabernacle. They had organized themselves by tribes and by clans and by families, each one assigned to a specific position around the tent of meeting. But they had also sinned at Kadesh Barnea. The 12 spies had returned from the land of Canaan, and 10 of them had given a report filled with fear. The people had listened to the 10 and had wept through the night, declaring that it would have been better to die in Egypt or in the wilderness than to fall by the sword trying to take a land defended by giants. And God had heard them. He had given them exactly what they said. Not the giants, not the sword, but the wilderness, that they would wander 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days the spies had explored the land, until every man and woman of that generation who had refused to trust God had died in the desert. Every one of them. Only Caleb and Joshua would survive to enter the promised land. This is the backdrop for Numbers 16. A people sentenced to wandering. A generation under divine decree. A community living with the knowledge that they would not see the fulfillment of the promise they had been shown. And within that community, a man named Korah decided that Moses had taken too much upon himself. To understand Korah, you have to understand his position. He was not a commoner. He was not an outsider. He was not someone who had been overlooked or forgotten. Korah was a Levite, and not just any Levite. He was the son of Izhar, who was the son of Kohath, who was the son of Levi himself. The tribe of Levi had been set apart from all the other tribes of Israel for a specific purpose. While the other 11 tribes received portions of the land as their inheritance, the Levites received something different. They were given the service of the tabernacle. They were given the privilege of carrying the house of God through the wilderness, of setting it up and taking it down, of serving at its courts, of standing between the holy things and the congregation. This was not a small assignment. This was the most sacred labor in all of Israel. And within the tribe of Levi, the family of Kohath held a position of particular responsibility. Numbers chapter 4 records it precisely. The Kohathites were assigned to carry the most sacred objects of the sanctuary when the camp moved: the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the golden lampstand, the 2 altars, the altar of incense and the altar of burnt offering, the utensils of the sanctuary. They did not carry these things carelessly. They could not even look at them directly. Before the Kohathites came near the sacred objects, Aaron and his sons had to go in first and cover each item, wrapping them in specific coverings, layer upon layer, so that the men who carried them would not see the holy things with their eyes and die. Numbers 4, verse 20. The Kohathites served in proximity to the holiest objects in the world. And Korah was a Kohathite. He had a position. He had a role. He had an assignment that the vast majority of Israelites could not even approach. But Korah looked at Aaron, and he looked at Moses, and something inside him decided that what they had was something he deserved too. The text of Numbers 16 opens with a single sentence that sets everything in motion. Korah, son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and certain Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, Andon son of Peleth, became insolent and rose up against Moses. Numbers 16, verse 1, insolent, that is the word. The Hebrew is nasa lev, which carries the sense of lifting oneself up, elevating the self, setting oneself above the proper order. And then Korah gathered his followers, 250 men. These were not strangers pulled off the street. These were members of the council. The Scripture calls them leaders of the congregation, representatives of the assembly, men of renown, Shem. That Hebrew word again, men with names, men who were known, men who had standing in the community, 250 of them, and they came against Moses and Aaron together. And they said, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" Numbers 16, verse 3. Read those words carefully. Read them slowly, because on the surface they sound almost right. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. This was not entirely false. God had said something similar, and he had told the entire nation of Israel that they were to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Exodus chapter 19, verse 6. He had said that his presence was among them. He had said that he had chosen them as his people. Korah took those truths and weaponized them. He used the language of equality and shared holiness to argue against the distinction that God had specifically established. He was not saying, "Let us all serve God together." He was saying, "Why should Moses and Aaron have a position that the rest of us do not have?" That is a fundamentally different argument, and it is an argument that has echoed through human history in 1,000 different forms. The appeal to fairness to justify the rejection of divinely established order. The claim of shared dignity to dismantle specific calling. The language of inclusion to delegitimize appointment. Korah sounded spiritual. Korah sounded reasonable. Korah sounded like a man standing up for the people. But what Korah was actually doing was refusing to accept that God had the authority to place one man in a position that he had not given to another. Moses heard every word, and the Scripture records his response in a single verse that deserves far more attention than it usually receives. When Moses heard this, he fell face down. Number 16, verse 4. He fell face down, not in shame, not in defeat, not in calculation. Moses fell face down before God. He did not match Korah's rhetoric with his own. He did not call for the leaders of Israel to assemble and hear his defense. He did not organize a response. He fell on his face. This is not a passive response. This is a profound one. It is the posture of a man who understood immediately that what was happening was not primarily a conflict between himself and Korah. It was a conflict between Korah and God. And the only appropriate response was to press his face into the ground and let God handle what God had established. Moses had never wanted the position he held. Go back to Exodus chapter 3 and 4. God spoke to him from a burning bush and commanded him to go to Pharaoh. Moses had objected 5 times. He had said he was not the right man. He had said he did not know what to say. He had said the people would not believe him. He had said he was not a good speaker. He had asked God to send someone else. Moses did not grasp after this role. God placed him in it. And now Korah was accusing him of having taken it for himself. When Moses rose from the ground, his response was measured and precise. He told Korah that the answer would come in the morning, not from Moses himself, but from God. He said, "In the morning the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy, and he will have that person come near him. The man he chooses, he will cause to come near him." Numbers 16, verse 5. Then he turned the argument back on Korah with a question that cut straight to the center of the rebellion. "You Levites have gone too far." Numbers 16, verse 7. Moses reminded Korah of exactly what he already had. He said, "Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work at the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and minister to them? He has brought you and all your fellow Levites near himself, but now you are trying to get the priesthood too." Numbers 16, verses 9 through 10. That phrase, trying to get the priesthood too, that was the heart of it. Korah wanted what Aaron had. He wanted the high priestly role. He wanted to stand before God in that specific capacity. He wanted the appointment that had not been given to him, and Moses named it clearly. "It is against the Lord that you and all your followers have banded together. Who is Aaron that you should grumble against him?" Numbers 16, verse 11. The rebellion against Moses and Aaron was, at its core, a rebellion against the God who had chosen them. Then Moses sent for Dathan and Abiram. They refused to come, and their refusal was accompanied by words that revealed the depth of their bitterness. They sent back a message, "We will not come. Isn't it enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, and now you also want to lord it over us? Moreover, you haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Do you want to treat these men like slaves? No, we will not come. Numbers 16, verses 12 through 14. Sit with those words for a moment. They called Egypt a land flowing with milk and honey. Egypt, the place where they had been slaves, the place where their infant sons had been thrown into the Nile, the place where they had made bricks without straw under the whip of taskmasters. That place, they called it a land flowing with milk and honey. And the wilderness, the very place where God was feeding them daily with bread from heaven, where His cloud led them by day and His fire by night, where the presence of God Himself dwelled among them, they called it the place where Moses was trying to kill them. They had inverted everything. Bondage had become abundance. The journey toward the promise had become oppression. The presence of God had become a threat. This is what unresolved bitterness does to the human mind. It does not simply distort one or two memories. It distorts the entire framework through which a person sees their life. It rewrites the past to justify the resentment of the present. Dathan and Abiram were not simply ungrateful. They had constructed an entire alternative narrative, one in which they were victims of Moses rather than a delivered people of God. And they refused to come. The Scripture says that Moses became very angry when he heard their words. He prayed, "Do not accept their offering. I have not taken so much as a donkey from them, nor have I wronged any of them." Numbers 16, verse 15. This is not the prayer of a defensive man protecting his reputation. This is the prayer of a man who had carried a nation for decades, who had interceded for them, argued with God on their behalf, endured their constant complaints, asking God to see the truth of what He had done and what He had not done. Moses had not enriched himself through leadership. He had not used his position for personal gain. He had not wronged them. And he asked God to see it. The next morning came. Korah had assembled all 250 men at the entrance to the tent of meeting, but each man held a censer. Understand what a censer was and why this act was so significant. A censer was a container used to carry burning coals and incense. In the tabernacle worship, burning incense before the Lord was an act reserved for the priests, specifically for Aaron and his sons. It was not an act that any Levite could perform. It was not an act that any Israelite could perform. The burning of incense in the tabernacle was so specifically regulated by God that, earlier in the book of Leviticus, two of Aaron's own sons, Nadab and Abihu, had been consumed by fire from the Lord because they offered unauthorized fire before Him. Leviticus chapter 10. Two priests consumed by fire for approaching God without the authorization He had specified. Everyone in Israel knew this story. It had happened not long before. And now Korah and his 250 men were standing at the entrance to the tent of meeting with censers in their hands. They knew what had happened to Nadab and Abihu. They came anyway. This was not ignorance. This was defiance. The glory of the Lord appeared to the entire congregation. The Shekinah, the visible manifestation of the divine presence, appeared before all of them, and God spoke to Moses and Aaron. He said, "Separate yourselves from this assembly, so I can put an end to them at once." Numbers 16, verse 21. And again, Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. The posture again, the same posture. Even now, with the glory of God appearing and judgment announced, Moses and Aaron did not step aside. They pressed their faces to the ground, and they cried out, "O God, the God who gives breath to all living things, will you be angry with the entire assembly when only one man sins?" Numbers 16, verse 22. One man, Korah. Moses was interceding for the congregation, asking God to distinguish between the leader of the rebellion and the people who had been swept up into it. And God heard the intercession. He told Moses to tell the assembly to move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Mercy, operating within judgment, the line being drawn not around the entire congregation, but around those who had initiated and sustained the rebellion. Moses walked toward the tents of Dathan and Abiram. The elders of Israel followed him. As he walked, he called out to the congregation, "Move back from the tents of these wicked men. Do not touch anything belonging to them, or you will be swept away because of all their sins." Numbers 16, verse 26. The people moved quickly. They stepped back, away from the tents, away from everything that belonged to those men, and Dathan and Abiram came out. They did not run. They did not fall on their faces. They did not ask for mercy. The Scripture says they came out and stood at the entrance of their tents, with their wives, their children, and their little ones, standing, defiant, even now. Moses stood before all of them, the congregation that had stepped back, the elders who had come with him, and the households of Dathan and Abiram standing at their tent entrances. And he made a declaration that was unlike anything that had been said in the wilderness before. He said, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and that it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death and suffer the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them, with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the realm of the dead, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt." Numbers 16, verses 28 through 30. This was not a dramatic speech constructed for effect. This was a man placing the entire question of his calling before God in the most direct way possible. He was saying, let this be settled right now in front of everyone by something only God can do. If nothing unusual happens, then I am what they say I am. A man who has taken authority for himself. Someone who should be challenged. But if God opens the ground and swallows them alive, then every person watching will know where my authority came from. Moses was not defending himself. He was inviting God to answer. He had barely finished speaking. The ground beneath Dathan and Abiram cracked open. The earth opened its mouth. It swallowed them and their households. Every person, every possession, everything that belonged to them. They went down alive into the realm of the dead. The earth covered over them. They were gone. No bodies left on the surface. No graves to mark the place. The ground simply closed, and they were gone. Gone into the earth alive, the Scripture says, with everything they had. The congregation heard their cry as they went down. And all of Israel around them fled at the sound. They ran in every direction, calling out, "The earth will swallow us too." Numbers 16, verses 31 through 34. Then, in the same moment, fire came out from the Lord. It consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense at the entrance to the tent of meeting. 250 men, each holding a censer, each standing before the tent of the God of Israel with an offering he had no authority to bring. The fire came, and it was finished. Not a battle that lasted days, not a siege that wore down through seasons, not a slow unraveling. Minutes. The ground opened. The fire fell. It was done. The silence that followed must have been unlike anything that generation had ever experienced. The congregation was still standing where Moses had told them to move. The earth was flat where the tents of Dathan and Abiram had been. The 250 men were gone, and Eleazar the priest, son of Aaron, received the command of God. He was told to go and take up the bronze censers from where the men had been consumed by fire and scatter the coals from them at a distance, because the censers had been presented before the Lord and had become holy. They were to be hammered into flat sheets, and those sheets were to be used to overlay the altar of burnt offering, the altar that all of Israel would approach when they came to worship, the altar at the center of the community's encounter with God. It would be covered with the hammered remains of the censers that had been carried by 250 men who died trying to take what God had not given them. Every time an Israelite came to the altar, they would be standing before a surface made from those censers, a permanent, physical, inescapable reminder. No one outside the line of Aaron should come to burn incense before the Lord. The memorial was built into the altar itself. Numbers 16, verses 36 through 40. What happened next is one of the most staggering verses in the entire book of Numbers. The next day, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. "You have killed the Lord's people," they said. Numbers 16, verse 41. Read that again. The next day. The morning after the ground had swallowed Dathan and Abiram and their households alive. The morning after fire had consumed 250 leaders of the congregation. The morning after the most dramatic divine judgment anyone in that generation had witnessed with their own eyes. The people grumbled. They said Moses and Aaron had killed the Lord's people. They called the men who had led the rebellion the people of the Lord. They called the servants of God murderers. This is not a small detail. This is not a minor observation. This is the Scripture placing before us a portrait of the human heart in its most frightening condition. A community that had witnessed the ground open and consume men who challenged God's appointed servant and responded within 24 hours by accusing that same servant of murder. The rebellion had not ended with Korah. It had spread. As the congregation assembled against Moses and Aaron, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appeared. The Shekinah, the same visible presence that had appeared the day before, filled the tabernacle area again. God spoke to Moses and Aaron. He said, "Get away from this assembly so I can put an end to them at once." And they fell on their faces again. The same posture, the same response. For the third time in this account. But this time, something was already beginning. The Scripture says that a plague had started among the people. God did not wait for Moses to intercede before the judgment came. The plague began moving through the congregation even as God was speaking. Moses turned to Aaron with urgent words. "Take your censer and put incense in it, along with fire from the altar, and hurry to the assembly to make atonement for them. Wrath has come out from the Lord. The plague has started." Numbers 16, verse 46. Aaron took the censer. He took the fire from the altar, the same altar now overlaid with the hammered bronze of the 250 men who had died the day before. He took incense, and he ran. The Scripture uses that word. He ran. He went into the middle of the assembly, into the middle of the congregation where the plague was already moving, and he burned the incense. He made atonement for the people, and he stood between the living and the dead. Numbers 16, verse 48. That image, Aaron standing between the living and the dead with the incense burning, is one of the most powerful images in the entire Pentateuch. The priest, carrying the authorized offering, standing in the gap between judgment and the people, and the plague stopped. It stopped where Aaron stood. But by the time it stopped, 14,700 people had died. 14,700, in addition to those who had died because of Korah. Numbers 16, verse 49. In addition to the earth that had swallowed Dathan and Abiram and their households. In addition to the fire that had consumed the 250, 14,700 more. Because they called the men who challenged God the people of the Lord. Because they accused his servant of murder. Because even after witnessing what they had witnessed, the grumbling had not stopped. Aaron went back to Moses at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The plague was over. The camp was quiet again. And somewhere in that silence, the weight of everything that had happened in 48 hours settled over Israel like a stone. What do we do with a passage like this? It is easy to read Numbers 16 and feel only distance, to place it in a category labeled Old Testament or Ancient Israel or a different covenant and to move on. But that distance is not earned by the text. The Scripture does not present this account as an embarrassing relic that later revelation made obsolete. It presents it as a record of something that actually happened, something that was memorialized in the altar of Israel for generations, something that was referenced later in the New Testament itself. Jude, verse 11, warns against the way of Cain, the error of Balaam, and the rebellion of Korah. The rebellion of Korah appears in the New Testament as a category of spiritual danger, a pattern of behavior serious enough to name alongside the murder of Abel and the perversion of Balaam. This account is not in the past tense in the way we might assume. What exactly is the rebellion of Korah? It is not simply ambition. Ambition alone is not condemned by Scripture. Paul told the Corinthians to earnestly desire the higher gifts. He told Timothy that if a man desires to be an overseer, he desires a good thing. Ambition toward service is not the problem. The rebellion of Korah is something specific. It is the rejection of divinely established order through the language of equality. It is the use of true spiritual statements to argue against specific spiritual appointments. It is the decision to take by force or by consensus what God has not given by calling. Korah was not wrong that all of Israel was holy. He was wrong to use that truth to argue that Moses and Aaron's specific appointments were illegitimate. The holiness of the congregation did not eliminate the specificity of individual callings. Both things were true at the same time, and Korah could only hold one of them. There is something else in this account that deserves careful attention. The 250 men. Who were they? Leaders, men of renown, members of the assembly. They had not initiated the rebellion. Korah had, but they had joined it. They had picked up their censers. They had stood at the entrance to the tent of meeting. They made a choice. And the text does not soften that choice. It does not say they were deceived. It does not say they were coerced. It says they were leaders, men with enough standing to know what they were doing. and they chose to stand with Korah. The fire that came out from the Lord did not distinguish between the leader of the rebellion and the men who had followed him into it, because at the tent of meeting, holding a censer, they were all equal in their unauthorized approach, equal in their defiance, and the judgment was equal as well. Moses fell on his face 3 times in this account, 3 times. Once when Korah first confronted him, once when the glory of the Lord appeared and God announced judgment, once when the congregation grumbled the following morning and the plague began. Each time, the first response was the same posture, face down before God. Not argument, not self-defense, not organization of a counter-response. Face down. There is a pattern here that runs through the life of Moses that this account illuminates with particular clarity. Moses understood something that Korah never did. He understood that the authority he carried was not his. He had not achieved it. He had not earned it. He had not taken it. God had placed it on him at a burning bush in the desert of Midian, and he had spent the rest of his life trying to carry it faithfully. Every time that authority was challenged, his first instinct was not to defend it, because it was not his to defend. His first instinct was to press his face to the ground and let the one who had given it answer for it. That is the posture of a man who knows whose authority it actually is. There is a mercy in this account that is easy to miss. God did not consume the entire congregation. He had said he would. Twice he said he would put an end to them at once. Twice Moses and Aaron fell on their faces and interceded. Twice God drew the line tighter, first around the entire congregation, then around the specific households of those who had led the rebellion. And even then, when the plague began among the grumbling congregation the following day, Aaron ran with a censer and stood between the living and the dead. 14,700 died, but more than 1,000,000 did not. The mercy of God operated in the middle of the judgment. It did not eliminate the judgment, but it set a limit on it. And that limit was drawn by the intercession of 2 men who fell on their faces rather than stepping aside. Moses and Aaron could have said, "Let them have what they asked for. Let God deal with them. We will step back." They did not. They threw themselves to the ground on behalf of a people who were accusing them of murder while they did it. The bronze censers are still on the altar when the next chapter of Numbers opens. The Israelites are still in the wilderness. The journey continues, and in Numbers chapter 17, God does something that seems almost gentle in comparison to what just happened. He tells Moses to collect a staff from each tribe of Israel, 12 staffs, 1 for each tribe, each one with the name of the tribe's leader written on it. Aaron's name is written on the staff of Levi. Moses places all 12 staffs in the tent of meeting before the Ark of the Covenant. And the next morning, Aaron's staff had budded. Not just budded, it had blossomed, and it had produced ripe almonds. Overnight, a dead piece of wood. Overnight, buds and blossoms and ripe fruit. The other 11 staffs, nothing. God told Moses to put Aaron's staff back in front of the Ark of the Covenant, to be kept there as a sign against the rebels, to put an end to their grumbling against the Lord, so that they would not die. Numbers 17, verses 10 through 11. 2 signs kept before Israel in the tabernacle: the hammered bronze censers overlaying the altar, the memorial of the 250, the budded staff of Aaron, the confirmation of the one whom God had chosen, warning and affirmation, judgment and appointment, both kept in the place of worship, both placed there by the same God. The ground is flat now where Dathan and Abiram stood. The fire has long since gone cold where the 250 men were consumed. The 40 years in the wilderness would eventually end. Joshua would lead a new generation across the Jordan. The promised land would be entered. The history of Israel would continue across the centuries toward the fulfillment that the prophets had spoken of. But the account in Numbers 16 was not forgotten. The hammered bronze remained on the altar. The budded staff remained before the ark. And the record of what happened was written down and preserved across 3,000 years of human history until it reached this moment, until you are hearing it now. The Scripture did not preserve this story to celebrate the death of Korah. It preserved it to show the character of the God who responded, holy beyond human categories, just in a way that does not negotiate, merciful in a way that does not eliminate accountability, patient with human complaint far beyond what seems reasonable, responsive to intercession in ways that reveal how seriously he takes those who will stand in the gap, and faithful to the appointments he has made, faithful enough to answer publicly, dramatically, and unmistakably when those appointments are challenged by men with censors and arguments that sound spiritual and grievances that feel real. The earth opened, the fire fell, the plague moved, the staff bloomed, and Israel continued toward the land that God had promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, a people still being shaped, still failing, still being caught by the mercy of God, even in the middle of their worst moments. There is something in that which is not comfortable, but there is also something in it that is true, and it is the truth of it that makes it worth reading, worth sitting with, worth letting settle until the full weight of what happened becomes real. If this account moved something in you, if the depth of Scripture you just heard is the kind of content you want more of, you are in exactly the right place. At God's verdict, we go deep into the Word, not for entertainment, not for shock, for understanding. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Share this video with someone who needs to hear the full story, not the summary, not the outline, but the whole weight of what the Scripture actually records. We will see you in the next one.